Welcome to Kingdoms in Conflict. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Wallace. Is there a role for the church in our child welfare system? And does the disproportionate number of Black children in the welfare system prove the system is racist? Or does it point to another issue? Our guest today is Tony Lawlor, the Vice President and the co-founder of the Family Justice Resource Center. He is a staunch advocate for reform. He is here to address issues with the Department of Child and Family Services and more. We will return. This is part 2.
Our country is in a dark, challenging, and anomalous place. As Christians, we are not only called to represent the standard for living life before the holy and just God, but also to live countercultural to the forces of darkness. In its 3rd season, Kingdoms in Conflict addresses these issues from a biblically conservative worldview. Text Kingdoms to 877-425-2104 for free access to our media and resources. Together, let's take back America for the kingdom of God.
Welcome to Kingdoms in Conflict. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Wallace. And it's a pleasure to have with us again, for the second time, our good friend, Tony Lawlor. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks for inviting me again.
Last time, I think Tony was talking a little bit about his own he already talked about his personal situation growing up, but then he also had another situation which involved his daughter. He was talking about that, but I had to kind of cut him off because our time was running out. So I had asked him to share that story again. And then we want to get into talking about a little bit more about disparities that we talked about before. And then, of course, going to talk about what the role of the church can be. I know that's one of the things you really wanted to talk about. So if you don't mind going back to sharing your story about your daughter.
I started a nonprofit organization where I was serving youth in care. Now, while I was serving youth in care, I had a 6-month-old daughter at the time who suffered a life-threatening injury. And me and the family was together. We were preparing to check out of a hotel. And while I was in the bathroom taking a shower, my daughter suffered a very severe injury. She had fallen as she was with her 6-month-old sister at the time. So she had fallen from the couch. And what happened was that DCFS came in and investigated us. They asked a lot of questions at the hospital and so forth. And so at every hospital, there is usually a pediatrician that is assigned to DCFS. And that particular pediatrician that was assigned to our case, without any doubt, said that the injuries that my daughter suffered was that of blunt force trauma. She literally said it was shaken baby. So without any proof or without any evidence, the pediatrician who had never met us in our entire life, didn't know our history background, said that we had shaken our daughter, and they actually pointed to me. Now, it was interesting because I wasn't even present when my daughter suffered her injury, but yet when she did suffer her injury, I was the actual primary accuser. When I said that I wasn't even present, they said that my spouse and our 6-month-old daughter had to have been lying to cover me up. So my daughter went into foster care for 3.5 years. I literally lost everything. The nonprofit that I started, I was fired from because we had a contract with DCFS. I had given up everything in my life to serve youth and to serve, the foster care community. And yet on that one day, the people that made the decision within DCFS was on staff for 4 months. And they said, yep, whatever the pediatrician said must be true. So 3.5 years it took for a judge to turn around and return the children. I mean, I was placed in multiple counselings, all kinds of things, and they still couldn't come up with anything besides a verdict of that he is innocent. I had DCFS workers and counselors say that this man is a better father than even they were, and they worked for DCFS, and
Right.
yet it still went on. So my point was that eventually my daughter ended up, being healed and is thriving today with a little bit of some disabilities, but again, she's thriving. And then even when the judge returned home, that was just about custody. DCFS still said, you're guilty. And so in their system, they have this system that they track, they keep you in their system for 20 or 50 years, depending on what you're accused of. So my name would have been in that system for 50 years. I would never be allowed to work with any youth ever again. And that was what I had to go and hire another attorney for in order to clear my name. So it took a total of 4.5 years total to be free and clear of all of that. And I'm still dealing with some of the residue from that. And that's how I formed or started working with parent advocacy groups, not only in Illinois, but across the world. So this is one of the things, is some of this sort of accusations and accusals that, again, at every hospital, there's somebody that works, that has a contract with DCFS. It automatically seems like majority of those folks are, a lot of times you find families are being accused of abuse because of a kid falling or having a medical mimic of abuse, certain things like that. So that's just telling that part again a little bit to get everybody up to par.
No, I appreciate it. And that explains a lot. Not only did you grow up in the system, but then you also became a victim of the system itself. So the first part, obviously not your fault at all. Your mother finds herself with 5 kids, a single parent, and that's generally the profile, is it not? A single parent is more likely probably to have a run-in with DCFS than a married couple.
I don't know the exact statistics on that, but here's something that to know. There is a family that I worked with that was a Black family, married with 3 children, and the husband was abusing the wife. And because of that abuse, DCFS took the kids. They took the kids because they said that the wife she left her kids in harm's way by being in that abusive relationship until she said enough is enough. So the system picked a Black family to do that. But I'll tell you this, the statistics show that in terms of the total number of youth in care, there's almost 21,000 that was reported in February 28, 2022. This is on the DCFS website. So 21,000. Of that 21,000, that it's like 62% is the population of white versus under 30% is the population of Black. So there's like, for every 1 white child, there's 4 Black children in the system. And I'm just using that as just using that just to let you all know in terms of the number of kids. And the way that, and so there's this other part that whenever there's a hotline call, that starts an investigation. So DCFS goes in, they takes the kid, and so what I'm saying is, right, let's just say that, like I said, 4 out of 1. So we're seeing a lot of hotline calls called on Black families. I don't know if they're all single families or not, but there's more hotline calls on that, even though there's more number of white youth in the system. But again, that in terms of the population, we're seeing 4 to 1, and kids that are in the system 12 months or greater, there's more Black children in the system longer than white children. So these are the reasons, these are some of the policy issues and some of the things that we're looking at, not necessarily pointing fingers, but also looking at what is going on with these disparities. How can we, work on this where there's less kids going into foster care? And I'm not saying that all of the parents were guilty. The hotline call triggers them to investigate, and they take the children. So we found that under 25% of the hotline calls become unfounded. The kids go back home. But again, the majority of them, hotline calls and investigations, are on minority families. So that's where we are. We just need to figure out the solution to how do we minimize those and get these kids out of foster care and back into either homes or with family.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think we talked about this last time. The success, I mentioned the success sequence, which was to finish high school, get married, and then have a child. You were less likely to fall into poverty. If that is true, it doesn't mean you won't, but it says you're less likely. The chances are you won't fall into poverty if you get married and then have children, and obviously have a job first. But if you're single and you're having children, it's more likely then that you're going to fall into poverty. Your mother was an example of that. She had 5 kids, right? And so if that's true, and that's happening in the Black community, so one could say that some of this may be part of our own culture or subculture that is producing more kids going into foster care than there should be. All I'm saying is the disparity means we need to check out what the actual reason is for this happening in our communities. We shouldn't go directly to, and I'm not saying you did this, we shouldn't go directly to racism as this must be racism because there's a disparity between white kids and Black kids. Matter of fact, if we look at our society, Blacks are overrepresented in sports and entertainment. And I think that's a cultural thing. I don't think it's a racist thing that we're only allowed to do certain things. But there are fewer, like one of the people I really like is Ben Carson, but there are fewer neurosurgeons who are Black because we just don't a whole lot of us going into that field. So all I'm saying is that disparities, yes, they're there, and it should be, and I think you're correct. The antenna should be going up saying, why is this so? And what can we do about it? Because if we don't diagnose it right, like a doctor, if he doesn't diagnose it right, he's giving you medicine for the wrong thing. If you got COVID and they're giving you, medicine for chicken pox or something, then that's not going to help. So that's all I meant. So do you understand what I'm saying with that?
I do. And I just going to say, there's some, obviously, the data and things like that we'll talk, and I'm sure we can go back and forth on it, because when we look at sports, we do see a disproportionate amount of athletes that are minorities, but we see very little owners. That's where the disparity. But even in foster care, we have almost 12,000 white children in care. So we, to use
but it still doesn't tell you why.
Right.
There's got to be a reason to figure out why is this so.
But with the white family, it doesn't point out if they're single or not. We don't know if white families are single versus Black families, but the number is only 2,000 youth disparity between the two, even though there's a greater white population. And even when it comes to medical, there's more Black moms that lose babies, right? That, like, the statistics show that Black moms lose babies. There's more deaths, right? And we don't like why is that? But there's speculation that there's less treatment, there's less healthcare, there's less, you know what I mean? So we could go on about it. But again, in terms of foster care, I think instead of, we do have to come up with a solution and figure out how we can reduce the number of kids in care, and even those that are in care, the stay. So we know right now that the current director of DCFS is in contempt of court for 9 different times. But some of the issues is that kids are staying in psychiatric hospitals. They're not being placed in homes. So that's one of the things that I want to get to. Some of the solutions would be so some of the solutions that I'm thinking about is that, using the Bible, right? If I could say a couple of verses, for example, Exodus 22:2-24, it says, "You shall not mistreat any widows or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cries. Right. My wrath will burn and will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows and children fatherless." Again, Psalms 82:3-4. "Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked." So we see all these scriptures that's telling us about like Zechariah, do not oppress the widows and the fatherless or the poor, and let none of your devise evil against, let none of you devise evil against another in your heart. So the Bible often, there's so many different scriptures that talk to us about actually saving and helping the oppressed, right? If we have 2 shirts, give one. And so I'm thinking that, again, one of the things that I could say, that we should look at the church and see how the church can assist in this particular event. So we have all these over 21,000 kids in foster care, regardless of their race, right? But we have thousands, billions of Christians in this world. But if we look at just Illinois, right, we have tons of Christians that have Christian values and obviously read their word. So what I'm saying is that perhaps we could look at Christians, actually the church, and taking, a look at seeing how we can help out. Maybe not everyone can be a foster parent, but maybe some people have influence in policies. Maybe we could get more people just involved in looking at some of these disparities and saying, how can we help? How can we serve? There's a small percentage of children that actually go on to college. I was fortunate enough to go on to get a undergrad degree and a master's degree. So I've already surpassed most of those odds, but that number is very small. Majority of the kids, if they're moved 5 times in placement, they're more likely to end up in jail. This is regardless if they're Black or white. So we're looking at this pipeline from foster care to prison. We want to stop those things, but we need Christians, we need families, we need people to stop pointing fingers and really stepping up and saying, how can we change? And that's part of the purpose and the passion that I have for this work. That's why I'm a parent advocate. I'm just trying to find ways that we can, as parent advocates, to be at the table while people are making decisions about children, and seeing how we can sort of reduce that number and get kids either home or with kinfolk.
So what steps would you say that, a church, somebody's watching, a pastor is watching right now, what would you tell him that he could do? I mean, is there something that can a church, start an orphanage, or can they,
Well, there's some partners that I'm working with in Africa that's trying to diminish orphanages. So when we think of orphanage, that's like a group home, right? We have those, so to speak, in a Western way. Those are group homes. And so what I would say, if those that are looking and you feel led and you're a believer and you're hearing this conversation, I would pray first and ask God specifically if you should become a foster parent. Foster parent does not mean that it's permanent. It can be temporary. Majority of the youth in care are between 0 and age 13. And so there's more after that, but that's the largest population. And that's the population that really a Christian family could make a difference in a kid, because a lot of them may be, filled with trauma. But if we can get them into a home, temporary, helping them, showing love, being the example that God, called us to do, to help the orphans and widows, then that, I think, is going to make a difference. So starting by contacting a local, like Easter Seals or Aunt Martha's, any of the organizations that serve foster youth, either volunteer, right, or find ways to help to donate. A lot of these young kids just really need somebody to love, and they're dealing with a lot of trauma. And so they might be, dealing with some anger issues, but they really do need love. And I think we can just start with love. The key is love, and love is the key. That's what we can start with, and praying and asking God how to serve and how to help the population.
But I think some of what you said, and is one of the reasons why some people may be a little apprehensive about taking someone in their home, because some of the kids do have issues. And if you already have kids, the question is, how is this person going to affect my household and my family? How do what do you say to people who are reluctant because they know that some of these kids are coming from, certain types of abuse, whether it's sexual abuse or mental abuse or whatever? How would you speak to them? about?
Well, the foster care system, majority of the system actually partners with organizations that provide counseling and so forth. So again, it's a process. No different that if we were a believer and God specifically told us, right, to reach the lost. Well, think about the lost. They're dealing with substance issues, poverty, right, mental illness, anger. But God tells us to He might assign any one of us, right, to evangelize to the lost. That's building a relationship over time. We don't just give up just because it's hard, right? But that's why it's important to pray and ask God specifically if that's your particular ministry or calling. I'm not saying that you have to actually be the foster parent where they come in your home, but you could volunteer and you can serve in different ways. But if God does call you to be that, He's never going to put on you more than you can handle. So that means that that particular person might be called to pair with that young boy or girl. And over time, I promise you, when they feel the love and they feel that you genuinely care about them, over time they'll start to open up to that. But think about them being snatched from their family, right? Most of the children, regardless of why they come into care. Now, this is true in the sense of when I was overseeing the children in the state. Majority of them would still prefer to go back home with their family, right? If the case was something like neglect or abuse, but it wasn't anything like overly traumatic, right? Some of them would still say, I'd rather be with my mom or my family than to be in the foster home, right? And so again, it would be great, even if their kids are in the foster home, if they could slowly visit with, family members, maybe as mom, goes through rehab or mom gets, out of poverty and gets a job. We want to slowly integrate them back and just show like, there's this saying, it takes a village to raise a child. So thinking of that from that old African proverb, takes a village to raise a child, that think about it is that we're asking Christians temporarily, right, to help to be the village and to develop this young person so they can go back home to their family, even if it's a grandmother or a grandfather.
Well, that's a perfect place to end, my brother. I appreciate your passion. We're going to put up the, what's the name of your, the one where you're the vice president and co-founder, your organization?
Family Justice Resource Center. So you could visit us at famjustice.org.
Okay, we will put that on our screen and people will be able to learn more about what you're doing there and be able to give a donation.
Absolutely.
But thank you again for being with us. Those who are watching will be back in just a moment.
Rooted in the principles of responsible government, individual liberty and fidelity, strong family values, and economic empowerment, Freedom's Journal Institute strives to advance the kingdom of God through socio-political education and engagement rooted in a biblical worldview. We believe that when Christians, regardless of ethnicity, stand for what we believe in, actively engage in the political process, and prioritize biblical truth, then our country will change. Over the years, we have pledged as an organization to challenge liberal ideology with biblical, sound, conservative principles and values to promote a stable and sustainable family and society. Visit us at freedomsjournalinstitute.org or text KINGDOMS to 877-425-2104 to download our app and receive free access to our media and resources, along with regularly updated news, events, and information as it is available. It is time for us to rise.
Welcome back. In the first interview with Tony Lawlor, my final thoughts looked at James chapter 1, verse 27, which says, quote, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world, end quote. I want to address the quote, keep oneself unstained from the world, end quote. James is calling the church to stay away from the world's corruption. It's the renunciation of the world's thinking. Chapter 4 lays it out as James speaks of quarrels and fightings amongst the church. They have lusted, killed, desired to have, and been frustrated. He speaks of a war within, of coveting and praying wrongly to engage their passions. James calls them adulterous people. They are warned, quote, "Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God?" End quote. Chapter 4, verse 4. In verses 6 through 10 of chapter 4, he speaks against pride. In verses 11 through 12, James calls out those defaming by judging or speaking evil against their brothers. In verses 13 through 17, he speaks of their self-confidence in discussing tomorrow and determining their future without God. Lastly, in chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, James talks again about the misuse and priority of riches. Covetousness does not add anything to your life. It causes selfishness at the expense of others. Money does not equal happiness. James has challenged the perception of the blessed lifestyle by calling his readers to practice pure religion, which takes care of the orphan and the widow and is not stained by the world. In my conversation with many in the church, we are unfortunately using the systems of measure we have obtained from the world. I mentioned that disproportionality doesn't identify racism. There are many causes of disparate or desperate outcomes. Unfortunately, the woke crowd of today has fixed this idea in the minds of many that racism is the cause of much of the dysfunction in the Black community, including the desperate ratios we see in society. The problem with this thinking is that desperate outcomes are the norm, not the exception. Some of these outcomes are because of culture, education, geography, the generation in which we were born, and a host of other factors. Black people are turned down for house loans more frequently than whites, but whites are turned down more frequently than Asians. Banks want to get paid back. If your credit history says you might not pay them back, you won't get the money. Blacks are disproportionately overrepresented in basketball and football. Are they discriminating against white players? Several Black conservative economists have noted that over 70% of babies born to Black women are out of wedlock. That is a disproportionate amount since we are only like 13% of the population. Could this be feeding the desperate number of Black children in the DCFS? If single parents are more likely to encounter the welfare system, those with the highest single parent population are probably more likely to have children in the child welfare system. The secular world looks for easy answers to complex questions. James warns them not to think as they do. Don't be their friends or use their reasoning capacities, because they won't view the problem or answers through a biblical worldview, with complex solutions to complex questions that only God can fix with his prescriptions. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to be doers of the word and not just hearers, to practice pure religion and keep ourselves unstained by the world, because that is where God expects to meet us, for we are kingdoms in conflict.